Okay, we'll get started. I was just waiting for everybody to come on in and take a seat. Just a few more. Okay. I'll just go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to CGU's Reorientation Program, From Coursework to Completion. My name is Lisa Flores-Griffith. I'm Dean of Student Services here at Claremont Graduate University. And I'm really excited to open today's program. This is the first of its kind. And so just looking at you all, I know I've had an opportunity to work with some of you, and this is really exciting to see that many of you are taking advantage of programming such as this. Your participation today signals a commitment that you are serious about getting through some intellectually challenging milestones in your PhD program that at the end will be very rewarding as you make it across that finish line. We hope that today's programming will provide you with some of the tools to get you there. So I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank and to introduce the Student Success Center team. I'll start with Mark Pedretti. Mark Pedretti is the director of our Writing Center. Shamini Diaz, she's Director of Preparing Future Faculty. Christine Kelly, Director of Career Development. And I think Araceli stepped out. Oh, there she is, she's in the back. Araceli Torres is Director of Student Life and Diversity. And I really want to thank them because without them, today's programming wouldn't be possible. They have spent a lot of time, you all received a survey, listening to the feedback that we've gotten from students that are reaching this pivotal point in their academic career here at CGU and have put today's programming together, and they themselves are very excited about it. So I will now turn it over to Mark Pedretti, who will start with the faculty panel today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hear me okay? Lisa's right, I'm just sort of moderating the panel. The real stars of this hour are faculty members who've agreed to join us. We have first Heather Campbell, who's a professor and chair in the Department of Politics and Policy. In the middle is Tarek Azzam, who's an associate professor in the DBOS program. And Tom Luschei is associate professor of educational studies. We're hoping that Oishi from the Department of Cultural Studies will be joining us in a little bit. And I briefed them that I'm really going to just kind of turn the floor over to them. I've got some questions to get us started. And I think, so we're here trying to figure out, the question I wrote down is, where am I? The transition out of coursework is a crucial moment for graduate students, but it's also one that brings a lot of uncertainty. A lot of ambiguity around the process. Now the clear-cut structure of the classroom is over. So let's say I've just finished my coursework. What should I do first? What should my priorities be? What should I be paying attention to? Whoever wants to jump in on this is.
Well, if you just finished, is this working?
There you
yeah,
go.
Okay. If you just finished your coursework, then the first thing you really should absolutely be focusing on is passing your qual, whatever form that takes in your department. And that may sound mechanistic. In some departments, I gather that that's more clearly the natural next step than in others, but nonetheless, that really does have to be your next step.
I would also add that meeting with your advisor, the second that you're done with coursework, and potentially laying out a plan, because a couple of things that I want to recognize. I know that in some instances, the nice thing about being done with coursework is that it allows you to potentially search for full-time or part-time positions. And we understand that there's a financial component of it that's also critical. But as you're considering that, you should really think about, what are the most concrete next steps, and your advisor could help figure that out and work together to form some kind of timeline, and that could help guide your job search. So if you are trying to pursue something like a very aggressive timeline and finishing quickly, then maybe part-time or no work is the way forward, and there's a plan for that. If you kind of are on a more leisurely pace, that's a weird sentence. Then you know, how does that incorporate, and what are the next steps that are associated with it?
Great. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Student Success Center for holding this event. I think this is a really important part of your graduate careers, and I congratulate them for organizing this, because it's really this is really an important juncture of your graduate studies. So I am going to talk briefly about a book that one of my colleagues wrote with a former CG professor. So David Drew is my colleague in School of Educational Studies. He co-wrote it with a former CGU professor, Paul Gray. It's called What They Didn't Teach You in Graduate School, 299 Helpful Hints for Success in Your Academic Career. I'm going to just talk about 2 of them. There are still 297 more, so I recommend that you take a look at this book. I teach the Intro Pro Seminar for all our incoming PhD students in education. This is required reading for that class. So in this book, they talk about Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1 is structured coursework, which we all kind of know how to do. We take the classes, we do the assignments, we're successful. Phase 2 is much less structured. That's when you do your quals, your proposal, and your dissertation. And that's where we lose a lot of students, or students either disengage from the university, or they slow down their timeline. So what are the tips they give for Phase 2 for addressing the challenges that face you in Phase 2? One is maintain regular contact with your advisor, which is definitely a good idea, and be proactive. Don't wait for your advisor to be emailing you to say, hey, where have you been? I mean, some of us do that, but we have a lot of students. So it's hard for us to be very proactive in engaging with students. So be proactive with us. And the second tip for navigating Phase 2 is joining some kind of peer network, whether it's a writing group, an online Google Docs group. The key to succeeding in Phase 2 is really collaborating with your colleagues, with your peers. That's what's going to get you through Phase 2, most importantly. Of course, your relationship with your advisor and your committee, but be as proactive as you can in identifying peers. And they don't have to be peers who are doing similar research to yours. They just have to be peers who have the same goal of finishing that you do. So I really encourage you to take any opportunity you can to find peers you can work with in writing groups or other sorts of networks.
Well, I think it's really interesting that I'm going to offer color commentary as we go. You know, Heather, you gave us the kind of the short-term answer. Tarek gave us the long-term answer, and Tom gave the habits that you need to form to get from the short-term to the long-term. And I think that's a really good, you know, set of complementary perspectives there. And maybe picking up, Tom, on your last comment there, how to be a productive advisee. You know, we all know that, right, as you just said, you know, professors have a lot of students that they're working with, and so what can students do to maximize their interactions with their advisor? If I'm only going to get, you know, a half hour of your time in a month, what can I do to make that productive time?
So I guess I'll start. So I just want to give I've thought about some of my students who are in the dissertation stage, who have recently defended dissertations or are about to defend dissertations. I have one student in particular who actually designed a syllabus for her graduate studies, for her Phase 2. So she said, I'm going to read these articles, I'm going to have these meetings. She shared this syllabus with me, and she said, these are the dates I would like to meet, and here's my timeline. So she was extremely proactive, and I said, that sounds great. I'm going to write all of these dates in your calendar. I'm going to write all these dates in my calendar, so now I know when I'll be meeting with her, when she'll be sending me drafts. I mean, that's just a really great example. It doesn't have to be that. She's off the charts in terms of organizational skills, which is important also. I think time management and organization are probably the keys, other than peer networks and relationships, to succeeding in Phase 2. So that's one really successful case.
You know, this is a kind of a hard question to answer, because it really is also about who your advisor is and the type of interactions you have with them and so on. So there isn't like one directional But the things that, so what I'm going to be talking about is what I personally respond to in terms of what makes things kind of go smoother during the advising session. And one of the things is that we try and set up regular meetings, but in addition to that, there's usually an agenda that's sent beforehand. And so some of the students that I have, they will send me a list of things that they want to talk about the night before. And it gives me a chance to at least reflect on them and in some instances prepare my responses to them so that our time together is spent really on what they think is kind of the most critical thing that they're dealing with at that time. And I found that to be really helpful. The other thing that I do, and this is just because I'm inclined towards technology and all that good stuff, is that we actually have like a project management sheet that lays out the steps to going through the dissertation and the orals and so on and so forth. That's created and coursework that's created specifically for our program, and then we go through and check off where we're at during the meetings. And it's something that is online that we both have access to and can be used as a planning tool for both the student and for myself. And so it's a nice way for me to see where they are, because they can update it themselves, and I request that they update it before meeting with me. And we can update it after our meeting to kind of plan out next steps. So at least it kind of standardizes the experience to some extent.
One of the tendencies that I've noticed among at least some students, and to be honest, I certainly also had this tendency when I was a doctoral student in that phase, is a kind of a fear to meet with the advisor if you don't feel that you've made good progress. And one of the things that I would suggest is that it's important to recognize that one of the tough things I would say about moving into that next stage of the proposal and the dissertation is that you don't really know what it is. So you're supposed to create this big thing that you don't really know what it is. And so that's very intimidating. But the faculty do know what it is, and we know you don't, and we didn't. So one of the things that I would advise is don't always go to your professor aiming to say, okay, I accomplished this thing, what's the next thing, or I accomplished this thing, how did I do? But sometimes go to your advisor to kind of mull on some portion of it that you're having trouble with, and recognize that at least most of us are perfectly willing to help you with that. You don't only have to meet with us when you've actually accomplished something. You can meet with us when you're stuck. And I would say that that's a really important thing to keep in mind. So if you really, and you might have to get over some embarrassment. I mean, we sort of act like everybody knows what a literature review is, but maybe you really don't know what a literature review is, and so you've been sort of churning your wheels, reading everything under the sun and trying to write your literature review chapter, and you just can't really figure out what this massy thing is. Well, go to your professor and say, I'm really having trouble with the lit review. And you don't have to say, I've been beating my head against the wall for 2 weeks, but you can say, I'm just having trouble. This is something I'm struggling with. I need some help. Can we talk about this? And I think that kind of thing can be very, very helpful in breaking through, but it does often involve a certain amount of effort on you to kind of overcome your fear of looking foolish. So you'll just have to push through and overcome your fear of looking foolish and go meet with your advisor when you're stuck. So I would say that that's a really important thing to do to continue to make progress.
I think that's a really good point, in part because part of the shift is about moving from the classroom where you are kind of performing more, right, and you're just subjecting yourself to evaluation, to now, right, like actually, I mean, it seems like you're describing that's where learning happens, right, is when you're saying I don't know. So that's a really good place to start. All useful strategies. I have a couple of questions that allow us to kind of get into story time. I'm wondering what challenges each of you faced in this phase. If you have any, whether it was juggling other obligations, family, work, whatever, you know, what was it, what were the hurdles that you experienced, and how did you handle them?
Well, I will just tell you right now, I was a terrible dissertator. My husband, I went to Carnegie Mellon for my PhD, and right before I advanced to candidacy, so I didn't yet have candidacy, my husband took a job at JPL in Altadena. So he was, 2,500 miles away. We needed to sell our house, and I needed to go out there and join him. Almost as soon as I got out there, I got pregnant. I was completely isolated in every way. The place where we were living, there was no scholarly library nearby, and there was nobody in the area who knew anything about what I was doing or why anybody would do something weird like that anyway. And it was tough, and I didn't do a good job either. But eventually, you have to figure out a way to organize your day. So even though you've got all these other things that distract you, and no matter what, you're going to have other things that distract you. You may be distracted by work. Many people are working. You may be distracted because you already have children. You may be distracted because your parents get ill, and you have to, do something about that. And of course, there will be times when you have to stop the dissertation because something else in life is more important. But mostly what you need to do is not give yourself an out and force yourself to have a schedule to keep on working so that you do make progress. Every single day you need to make, even if it's only a little bit of progress. I mean, you can take Sundays off, but basically every single day.
My experience was perfect. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. Yeah, no, it actually was not. I think the thing I struggled with the most was at this stage after coursework, because in my area there's a lot of opportunities to get jobs. I do a lot of program evaluation, and there was just a lot of projects, and for about a year I did nothing but projects. I didn't meet with my advisor, didn't do anything towards finishing my degree, and it was basically the threat of my wife leaving me that got me to like, okay, I gotta get this done. I mean, to some extent. I mean, I'm slightly exaggerating, but it was, and then, to build on Heather's point, the thing about this stage, especially when it comes to the specific tasks that are associated with it, is that it's probably one of the few things at this stage where you have control over, and because you have control over it, you're more likely to say, I'll do it later. Versus everything else, family, kids, work, someone else kind of controls your schedule and what you do and your tasks. And so the disadvantage of having this control over this process is that you can basically say, well, because I'm controlling this, I'm driving this, I can set it aside for other priorities. And that's the place where you kind of get stuck in that. Because then it's day after day, 6 months later, a year later. Well, I'm still in control, but nothing's actually moved along. And so you have to take the control and set it, use that control to set it to the same level of priority as everything else, but you don't necessarily have full control over it. So just keep that in mind.
Did you just kind of bootstrap yourself out of it? You know what I mean? You're saying, like, basically take control, but,
yeah. Yeah, because you really have control over this process. I mean, it really, but the disadvantage of that is that you can set it aside, because no one else is going to be telling you, you have to do this, versus if you have a spouse, kids, or a boss that's telling you, this needs to be done, well, that's going to automatically jump it up in the priority list and jump everything that you have control over down. And so keep that in mind. It's really, at the end, it's about, I think there's that, what is it, there's that diagram where it's like, you know, there are things that are important and urgent, things that are important but not urgent, and things that are unimportant but urgent, and things that are unimportant and not urgent. And the dissertation is the important but not urgent. And that's the hardest one, because everything else kind of gets priority except for that, because it's not urgent. So, and that's where I see a lot of people struggle and where I struggle to get through.
So my experience was a little bit like Heather's in that about 2 days before I finished coursework, moving from phase 1 into phase 2, my daughter was born. In fact, I remember going to my professor asking if I could take the final at a different time because I had to be in the hospital for the birth of my daughter. And it was kind of funny because I was taking an undergraduate course and these 18-year-old undergrads were looking at me like, huh? This guy's having a baby? So anyway, the professor worked with me. But the point was, I was working on it. I had all this open, free time. Not free, but open, unstructured time. And I had my daughter, and I thought, hey, this isn't going to be a problem. I'll take care of my daughter, and then when she's taking a nap, I will write my dissertation.
I thought that too.
Yeah, it really didn't work that well. So I did ultimately figure out a strategy with, combining with my wife went on parental leave for a short time, and then we found someone to take care of my daughter for periods of time. So I did find a strategy, but having a daughter, having a child had such a tremendous impact on my organizational skills and motivation, because I now realize that any time I wasted surfing the internet or whatever I was doing, there was time I was stealing from my daughter, really, essentially. So I got really good at time management by having a daughter. And so when I had time to work, I had to really fight to carve out time to work, but when I had that time, I worked. And I've carried that strategy all the way through to today. And then the second motivating factor, similarly, I had a spouse who was very anxious for me to finish, but I also got a job, an academic job, and they gave me a deadline. You have to have your PhD by X date. And so that really motivated me as well. So those factors combined really pushed up the dissertation to important and urgent. So I just think it's a matter of putting that at priority number one. For me, it had to be external factors. In other people's cases, they can kind of internally motivate to do that, but it does have to be up there at the top of the priority list. You just came in, but
yeah, if you could just tell me, hi everyone, I'm Eve Oishi, I'm in the Cultural Studies Department. You just tell me what the
we're discussing our own challenges in getting through that phase 2 of graduate school, the post-coursework, and just if you had any stories you wanted to share about obstacles, struggles, anything, and how you dealt with them. That's kind of where we are.
Sure, yeah. I am not a very organized or self-motivated person. I have students come talk to me all the time about their struggles, and I'm always identifying very strongly with them. And sometimes I share that, sometimes I don't, but I realize most students they see their professors and they see us as, the epitome of all the, success that they aspire to, that they are incapable of, and we have reached that pinnacle of getting the job and getting the tenure and getting the publications, and in fact, we're a lot more like you than you think. And I definitely am not the kind of person that can just, carve out if I have an hour here or, time in the evening, I can whip out something. It has to be, the forces, the motivation all has to be external for me. It just does. And that's just the way that I am built. I know lots of people that aren't that way, but I am. And so, and that has not changed since I was writing my dissertation to where I am now. I still need to, the only way that I'm going to get anything done is if I structure things in such a way that there are either external support or external pressure, fear, anxiety, whatever it might be. I try to to lean more on the support side of it, just for my own mental health. It's hard to be completely motivated by fear and anxiety. It's not necessarily a healthy thing, but sometimes it's what you have to do. There's a deadline. The deadline's hard. You got to get it done. Nothing you can do about it, right? But so for me, I think what's been helpful for me, what I started to learn in graduate school and didn't actually really solidify until after I finished my dissertation, was creating my own support structures, and that was really, really helpful for me, particularly in my junior career. I started a writing group. That was huge. I cannot tell you how important that writing group was for me. I didn't do it in graduate school, but I did it afterwards, and I was the most productive when I was in that group. It was a group of about 5 other women who were at the same stage in their career as me. We shared work. We were accountable to each other. It was really the first time that I shared my own writing with anyone besides my professors, which was also a really important thing for me to learn to do, because there's this sort of preciousness that one has, I think, often about one's writing, where you can't share it with anyone until it's absolutely perfect, and of course you have to share it with your faculty, but you do it reluctantly because you also don't want them to think that you're not as good as they think that you are, and so it has to be perfect, and that whole process can be really paralyzing. So to learn to kind of share imperfect work, to share drafts, to see other people's process, to understand how hard it is for them, or what a first draft of someone else looks like, what a mess that can be, and how it really is about writing and rewriting and revising, is really, really helpful. So for all of you at various stages, whether you're in qualifying exams, I know we've had students who have had a lot of success with developing groups, reading groups for their qualifying exams, dissertations. If you can, whether it's just one other person or if you can find more people to share your work with and set deadlines, and it also became for me a really important. These were good friends of mine before, and now they are my closest friends in the world, and we've kind of gone through all the stages of our lives together. There were times when no one had anything to write about, so we would try different experiments. Some more successful than others. We tried to write poetry together one time. That didn't work at all. But we were just trying to think about how can we, what's our relationship to writing? How do we stay creative? How do we, what kind of ruts are we getting into our writing? Let's try to write a different way. Sometimes we just talked about our anxieties about the tenure process or whatever it might be. I think all of those things are connected as an academic. So external support structures, your peers. Here at CGU, there are a ton of them as well. The Writing Center, I can't stress enough how great that is. The dissertation boot camp. I have so many students who, at their defense, the dissertation defense, say, I would not have finished this without the dissertation boot camp. This is what got me to finish. So all of these external supports are out there. Just make sure that you take advantage of them, and if there's a need that you have that's not available, build it yourself, because there is this bootstrap mentality where you think, well, I should be able to do it myself, but the truth is we don't all have those inner resources, and that's okay. That's just the way that you're built. And so if you need to ask for help or find ways to give yourself support or give yourself motivation, or someone who's expecting something from you by a certain date, and it's someone that you trust, so that you can, if it's not really that good, you can still give it to them anyway, as opposed to holding on and not writing anything. I think that's invaluable.
I think that you brought up an important point about the structure. I think one of the things that's most hard of going from the coursework to the non-coursework stage is that, in essence, and Tarek raised this too, you're now floating in this kind of structureless sea, right? There's no rules, there's no boundaries, there's no, And one of the things I really wish I had learned when I was a student, but I didn't learn it until I was a faculty member, is that there are ways to create structures. I mean, you can think of things like, well, maybe I'll have a dissertation support group and we'll work together. But one of the things I learned is that faculty create structures by going to conferences. So we not only have lots of students, which we do have, especially at CGU, but we teach classes and we do our own research, and we still have families and all those other things. And so it can be actually hard for us to find the time to do research, even though mostly we really want to. Like, we really care about our research and we really want to do it, but it's still hard to find time. Well, one way, when I was a student, I thought that you could only go to a conference if you were like some great person who had some wonderfully perfected thing that you would now present. And I learned when I was a professor that one of the reasons you apply to a conference and get accepted is so you will have something on that date. Because now you have a deadline, right? So you've created an environment for yourself in which you have a deadline. And of course, you can't present your whole dissertation at a conference, but you could carve out a piece of it that you could present at the conference. Also, conference papers, well, I mean, you definitely need to talk to your advisor, because I do think there's some differences in the disciplines. So I know that in some disciplines, people actually read a crafted paper as their presentation at a conference. But in economics and political science and public policy and public administration, that isn't the case. And the conference paper is viewed almost as a draft. Like, it should be good, but it shouldn't be publishable quality. That comes later. So it's part of that writing and rewriting and rewriting thing, and it allows you to create this external environment. It's also harder to do this with your dissertation, but the reason you want to get done with the dissertation is so you can move on, right? And one of the other things that can be really helpful is to have co-authors, which is similar to having a writing group. Because for one thing, your lives will tend to not be perfectly correlated. So when I am completely slammed, my co-authors can keep writing, and then when they're completely slammed, I can write. And that means that the whole overarching arc of the piece is moving along even when I'm not the only one doing it. You can't do that exactly with your dissertation, because the dissertation is supposed to be generally your own work. But that doesn't mean that you can't be doing it with, again, sort of related pieces that will help keeping you progressing and energized and thinking about the work that you're also doing in your dissertation.
I agree with everything Heather says. That's certainly how I use conferences. I absolutely use them very strategically if it's about a piece that I need to write, and I know that I have to have, I have to have 10 pages done, to present publicly. For graduate students, I would say be very strategic about conferences. Talk to your advisor if you're thinking about submitting to a conference. I wouldn't recommend, I see a lot of graduate students going to a lot of conferences very early on because it's exciting, it's fun, it's in a cool place, and that can be kind of distracting, and you can end up spending a lot of time and a lot of money on something that you should be, where you should be spending your time, on your dissertation. So I would say conferences are for students who are writing their dissertations, who know what their dissertation project is, and you want to present a piece of that dissertation and use the conference as a way of both producing a deadline for yourself that you have to meet, and also, kind of trying out this writing and this research and getting feedback and, seeing what people think about it. But I think a lot of times students see, oh, this is a cool conference on, art and art and activism. I have some things I want to say about that. I have this paper that I wrote for a seminar that would be good for that. I could deliver that. It'll be a line on my CV. It'll be good for me. Actually, if it's just a line on your CV, it's not good for you. When you're up for, if you're on the academic job market, people are looking at your CVs. What they don't want to see is a whole line of conferences and no publications. Then they think, okay, this person has just been basically frittering away their time. It's not a helpful, really helpful thing on your CV. It's helpful as a way to help move your dissertation project forward, which is ultimately the most important thing for you on the job market. So again, different disciplines are different conferences are different. Talk to your advisor about any kind of conference plan that you have, and let them give you feedback about what they think is the best strategy.
So I've got one last question. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time. But one of the things that, we surveyed a lot of students to figure out what we wanted to talk about. And one of the things that came up repeatedly was students asking about how they can shorten their time to completion. And Tarek, you said, there's kind of you could take the quick path or the leisurely path. But what can students do to shorten their time to completion? I mean, we've touched on some things that get there, but if that's really your aim is get out fast. What's the best way to do that?
One of the things I really wanted to make sure I said today was to talk about students' relationship with their advisors and with their committee, particularly their dissertation chair. I think that students often students are afraid, intimidated, I don't know what I think there are different relationships that students have with their faculty members, but I think there's often this belief that we are really busy, which is true, and we don't want to be bothered with our students, and any kind of request from our students is an imposition that we resent, and that you have to be very careful about the things that you ask us, because you don't want to ask too much, because then you might lose our favor. And so students are not as, I find that students often don't assert themselves as much as they could with their faculty members. Now, of course, you want to be respectful, you want to, we are very busy, but we are also here to help you. This is our job. Our job is to guide you through this process, to answer questions, to read drafts. And so if you send an email or you send something to a faculty member, you don't hear back from them, don't assume then that they don't care about it, they don't want to respond to you. What probably happened is that they are really, really busy, they have a million other things, the email got buried in the inbox, and all these other things, kind of took its place. And so we really do appreciate gentle reminders, check back in, hey, did you get that draft that I sent you? Did you get that email? I think students are often afraid to do that. I always tell my students I really appreciate that because I need, like I said, I'm not a very organized person and I have a lot of things, a lot of requests for my time and for things that I need. And so I never see it as an imposition for students to ask me, to sort of follow up with something. It actually helps me to remember that this is something that needs to come back to them. That being said, you also want to be careful about when you are asking for help from your faculty member, not to just sort of come at them all the time with just questions that you might be able to find elsewhere. So I think a really good practice is, and I know some faculty members that actually have this as a policy. When they're working on a student's dissertation committee, they say, you're free to ask me for help at any time, but only if there's writing attached to it. Never contact me unless you have a piece of writing that you want me to comment on, whether it's small or large. It doesn't have to be a whole chapter. And not everyone has this policy, but this is a good practice, I think, for you to think about. If you want to ask help from your faculty member, if you're a dissertation committee about your dissertation, make sure that you actually have something that you can present to them that they can give you feedback on, so that you're not just kind of, asking them, how do I write a dissertation? But there's something actually solid that you can talk about. But that being said, the faculty, we are one of those external structures that are here to support you, to make sure that your work gets done. And you should definitely take advantage of that, and don't be afraid to ask us for help, because we need your help to give you help as well.
Yeah, I agree with the strategy of giving us gentle reminders, and I think it is also helpful to have something that you've written that we can look at. But it's also helpful, just yesterday or the day before, a student sent me, she just had a question about her conceptual diagram and her research questions related to the diagram. And she just sent me the diagram and 3 or 4 short questions. And that was really easy for me to look at and give her comments on. Whereas if you send a 200-page dissertation, it's a lot harder for me to motivate myself to read that, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to do that next week, and then maybe it'll get pushed to the following week. Ultimately, I'm going to have to read your maybe not 200 pages, maybe 120 pages dissertation. But if you're really stuck at one point of the dissertation or your proposal, just send me that one point. And then I can give you feedback on that pretty quickly. And be sure to point out in the email, I'm just sending you 2 pages. So then I won't have this block in my mind that, saying, oh, I don't have time to read, this whole dissertation right now. So if it's just a little piece, send me that little piece.
I agree with the comments that were made previously, and I just want to add, sometimes, okay, so when you say you want to finish relatively fast, one of the things that I frequently see is that the dissertation is seen as this huge, life-changing thing, and I meant my voice to get deeper, but it didn't happen. And in essence, a lot of times I have this conversation, and they want it to be this, paradigm-shifting experience, and the results be kind of earth-shaking. And I think that's a great thing to aspire towards, but for the purposes of dissertation, I don't think that's necessary. It needs to be, you need to definitely identify a problem, explain the relevance of that problem, and why it's worth pursuing, and how you're going to pursue the answers to that problem, and then build a study around that. And I think to a relatively high degree of depth. But sometimes what I see are dissertation proposals that are really interesting, but very unfeasible. And so there's the pragmatic piece that needs to come in to balance out kind of aspiration and pragmatism as part of the process. And I think that would help move along the process, because I have some students who are really interested in the academic route, and they want the dissertation to be kind of the keystone for their entire career. Like, this is it. This is going to be the thing I'm going to hold up for the next 20 years. And I tell them, well, if you're pursuing an academic route, you're going to have to publish so many other studies that you can build up and actually do a better job with cumulative studies, smaller studies, rather than just one big piece that'll take you 5 years to finish. And so just as something to keep in mind as you're contemplating topics.
Keep your scope narrow.
Yeah, so I agree. The best kind of dissertation is one that's done. And it is not your magnum opus. It's actually the beginning of you being an independent scholar, not the end of you being an independent scholar. So don't get and some students do get really hung up on how this has to be this uber great thing. This is the thing that allows you to move forward and do the uber great things later. So do try to keep that in mind. In terms of how to make it shorter or faster, I think in a way this is going to just sound kind of annoying, but it's really true. Spend more time on it. Be focused. Be dedicated. Talk to your advisor more often. It kind of comes back to what Tarek was saying about elevate it in your list of all the things that you're doing in your life. You've got to elevate this to the thing that's what you're really focusing on. And as long as you aren't really focusing on it, it's going to take longer. And when you start really focusing on it, it'll be so much faster. It was interesting to me that Tom said he got a job before he was done, and that happened to me too. They had hired 2 untenured faculty, I can't remember, 1 or 2 years before me, who had not completed their dissertations. And they hired me without my dissertation complete too. This, by the way, is increasingly unlikely, so don't expect that this will happen for you. The 2 people before me, one of the women, the woman, actually got fired because she did not complete her dissertation. So they hired her without it in hand. She had time to complete it. They gave her an extension. She still didn't complete it, and then she got fired. So this, as Tom said, was highly motivating. But also, it wasn't even just that. It was just astonishing to me how different the whole thing was when that was my job. I was in an office where I was supposed to work on my dissertation, and I did. you know? I mean, as opposed to when I was at home and I had to clean the house and cook dinner and keep my baby from crying and get her to daycare and, you know, blah, 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 blah. When I actually, like, went into this office for 8 hours every day, and of course I was still teaching classes and doing service and all those things you do as a professor, but nonetheless, a key component of my job was writing my dissertation, and it was incredibly more efficient because I elevated it, I had my butt in my chair, I knew that was my task, there was no question about that. I still didn't really know what I was doing, so there were still problems, but it was incredibly much more efficient. And I know it's hard, but I think really the key thing, if your goal is to get done faster, is to figure out a way to carve out time and space where you go 5 to 6 days a week, every day barring emergency, and you sit down and you work on this thing. And when you get stuck, you don't just sit there and beat your head against the computer or the wall or whatever, you talk to your advisor. And if you do that, if you elevate it as this key feature of your life and really focus on it, you will make progress. And that's one reason why boot camp is so great. Because it gives you a time and space to sit there and focus on that thing. And you're in an environment where everyone else is doing that too. I mean, and that was the other thing that helped me when I was an untenured assistant professor with a 3-year-old child and no dissertation and a deadline was everyone was doing that. You know, and that helps too. So that gets us back to this networking and finding an environment, is that instead of being in a place where people would look at me funny when I said I was working on my dissertation, like, well, what's that? Why would you do that? Well, what does that mean? You know, I do public policy, and there's still a lot of people who don't know what that is, but then there were even more. So I'd say public policy, and they'd say, that's interesting. What is that? So you want to create the environment. I think that's part of what we've all really been talking about when you think about it, when you kind of bring it together. You have to create an environment that's supportive, and so you need a carrot and a stick. And you've got to set up your environment in such a way that you've got supportive people, you've got deadlines, you've got a space where you can actually work, and you really do have to elevate it. You've got to stop giving yourself excuses for why you aren't going to work on it today. Well, I'm not going to work on it today because today my baby has a cold. I'm not going to work. I mean, there are serious reasons not to work on it today, but mostly when you say I'm not going to work on it today because of X, it's because you're afraid, or you don't really know what to do, or you just don't want to sit there for 3 hours, or you really got to make it your priority. That's how to get done faster. Maybe that's not exciting, but it's true.
It's like, when weight loss, you have all the different solutions, but it's really about, caloric intake and exercise. You know what I mean? At its core, it's like, it's pretty basic, but it's so hard to do. It's still hard. So.
Well, great. Well, we should probably wrap up and take a little break before our.
Should we let them have
Well, I wanted to, but we're starting the next session at 10, right, Shamini?
Yeah.
Isn't that right? And we want to give everyone a little break, so I'm afraid we don't have much time for questions. But so we'll just say thank you to our faculty panel. Very well.